Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. Kent Myers is usually here sitting beside me, but Kent has the day off. As you know, we're here meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues on a weekly basis. And today we have a show that we've entitled Women in Banking. Jill Castilla is our guest. Jill is with Citizens Bank of Edmond, where she serves as a president and CEO. It's all coming up next on The Verdict.
I like the idea of improvisation and starting with not a preconceived idea. All of my work is about visual images taken from my memory. I'm Brenda Kingery. I am an artist and I'm a proud Chickasaw. One time I said, "Oh God, please don't let me die with my paintings in the closet." And what I would want them to be is everywhere. I would want them to be loved, to be used, to be respected. You work your whole life doing this. You just keep going as long as you can. And I have such a good background with a 106-year-old grandmother that I've always thought in my mind I would just paint till I'm 106. My Chickasaw heritage has become a primary part of my life. And the reason is, it's a place I call home.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofenation.com.
People have been talking about energy independence for a long time. It's always been popular, but today it's possible.
We have an enormous supply of oil and gas in the United States, much more than we thought just a few years ago.
New technology, massive new discoveries, largely made by Oklahoma companies. It literally changes everything.
And Oklahoma is leading the charge. Go watch this video to see why. Energy independence starts with us.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett, minus Kent Myers this week on The Verdict, but we are joined by this week's guest, Jill Castilla. Jill, welcome to The Verdict.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we have an incredible biography here. You don't look old enough to have accomplished nearly this much. But she began her career with Citizens Bank in 1998, but then you worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, where you worked in the Oklahoma City office and also in Kansas City. Then went on to serve some time in Grand Rapids at Grand Rapids State Bank. I guess that would be up in Michigan? Or
Northern Minnesota.
In northern Minnesota, okay. More than one Grand Rapids, I guess, makes sense. But she also has very impressive academics. She's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Graduate School of Banking. She has a master's in economics from the University of Oklahoma. She is a distinguished alumna from Hawaii Pacific University, and she serves on the boards of directors of the Oklahoma Bankers Association and the Community Bankers Association, as well as a trustee for the UCO Foundation and Edmond Public Schools Foundation. So with all that on your plate, I'm sure, I really appreciate you taking the time to come over and visiting with us.
I really appreciate it. I love being here.
Well, we have titled the show Women in Banking, but I had hoped to really broaden the category a little bit and just talk about the evolution of banking, because you mentioned during the break with me that it's a very dynamic industry considering that it's been around so long. How do you keep up with it?
Well, the community banking industry is just extremely resilient. Our bank is 113 years old, so we've been through booms and busts, dust bowls, Great Depressions, and we've come out at the end of it. And it's that nimbleness and that ability to adapt to the environment that I think has allowed the industry to sustain for so long and to be such a unique financial structure that we have in our world. There's no other place like what we have, the structure we have here in the United States. It's not replicated anywhere else in the world. And
Oklahoma bankers, of course, have a lot of history of turmoil. There's always the 1930s when so many banks closed, but a much more recent memory is the 1980s, when one bank went down and before you know it, 100 banks in the state had gone down. Yet we seem to have emerged at that unscathed, although it took a long time. I think the image of Oklahoma banking took a real hit for a long time, but we seem to have come out of that unscathed, but it's a different environment today, isn't it?
It is a different environment. I think Oklahoma bankers are as resilient as Oklahomans, and we're a tough bunch. We're hardworking. We know how to adapt to what's going on around us, and we know how to survive. And I think that's what makes Oklahoma bankers, where we came through this recent financial crisis pretty unscathed as well. There's a lot of really smart bankers out there that care about our community. They're highly engaged, that understand the business environment, and they stay true to their roots. They're not branching off and doing wild and crazy things. They're doing what Oklahomans do and financing what happens here.
How do you define a community bank?
I define a community bank. I feel like I work at the quintessential community bank. I take in money from my community. I listen to small business opportunities out there of individuals that are needing a home loan as well as to start up or expand their business. And then I get to be the trustee of those depositor dollars from my community to reinvest in our community to help it grow. I think that's what community bankers do. I think there's all different kinds of scales of that, but that's how I define it and how I feel like we're different than maybe a very large bank would have difficulty really staying engaged with their community like that. As citizens, we not only will finance a small business, but we'll host cash mobs at that business where we give our staff money, promote on social media, get the whole community to really support and lift up that business, not just by providing them a loan, but really providing them added visibility and support so that they have the opportunity to succeed. The
home mortgage crisis that we went through about 5 years ago altered banking once again. Are banks more conservative today than they might have been 10 or 20 years ago?
Well, I don't think the crisis resulted in us being more conservative. The added regulation as a result of the crisis has caused us to be more conservative, I believe, at least at some banks. There was great intentions behind the new regulations, especially those that were introduced with Dodd-Frank, and the CFPB has great intentions to protect consumers and ensure that that crisis doesn't happen again, that individuals aren't being put in mortgages that they can't afford. Good bankers, though, don't do that, and so the regulations can sometimes keep us from doing the normal type of loan that we would normally want to do, or maybe the black and white numbers don't really show the true story of what's happening with an individual or small business. And it's nice to have the flexibility where you can meet a need where you know someone can repay. But now the regulations, just I think that they were put on a little too strongly, and there's volumes of them that make it pretty intimidating for a banker to stay in that same wheelhouse that's been successful for the last 100 years.
A lot of people's first experience with a banker or a bank as an adult is when they buy their first home. And we all know stories about the East and West Coast and how the housing prices have increased and that American dream has disappeared for a lot of young people. But in Oklahoma, housing prices are pretty low, and I'm continually amazed. I see young people, they graduate from college, and within a few months they seem to have qualified for a loan and bought a home. Is that unusual across the country? Is Oklahoma a little bit different?
I think so. And this millennial generation is buying homes much, much later, and I don't know if it's a result of the lack of credit available to them on the East and West Coast, but in the center of the United States, we're still seeing where if someone has the ability to repay, no matter how old they are, then we're able to meet that need and help them get into that first home.
Well, you talk about the millennial generation. Let's expand on that. I mean, their expectations of doing business are much different than mine, or certainly my parents' generation are. I could picture a millennial who has no intentions of ever physically going to the bank.
Yes.
Yeah, and so how do you deal with that, with the way that they want to interact and communicate?
Yeah, millennials are 80 million strong, so they're going to change the way all businesses do business, I think. But even though they may not physically go to the bank, they demand attention. They want to have high accessibility to whomever they're doing business with. And they'll go through the trouble of going to the local coffee shop that may not have the drive-through or all the locations that a Starbucks has, but they love that connection to that shop owner and that they're making a difference in the community by supporting that local small business. I think community banks are positioned to do something similar with millennials whenever you understand that basically you're taking these homegrown dollars and creating these homegrown business opportunities through small business financing. Then I think that brings them to the bank. I think there's a way where you have to connect with the millennial generation where the only connection can't be just the branch, just the lobby of the bank, or just the chamber luncheon. You have to go out and meet them, and social media is such a great way to do that, where you can really get to know someone and have a level of intimacy from a professional relationship standpoint via social media. You get to know each other, you get to know each other's business and one another's families, and then you have this level of connectedness that may not even result in a real life meeting opportunity. I find that that's a great way for us to attract small businesses to Citizens Bank because they feel a connection even though it may not be that the branch itself is very accessible to them.
So you're saying you connect with them through social media?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, banking has always been such a relationship business. I mean, most of the business leaders that I'm familiar with talk about their bankers if it's one person and it's a personal relationship. And if that banker changes banks, usually the business changes with them because that's the relationship, that's what they're comfortable. They don't have to explain what they do or their credit history to someone new. They have someone. And so it's interesting to me that you talk about establishing relationships in social media. Is that just going to be the new norm?
I think so. I think we're going to have to be creative in all different ways to connect with this millennial generation. They're just different. And I'm a Gen Xer, so I don't pretend to know exactly how they think, but I grew up in a very technologically dominant environment from a very young age on. And so that's how I like to connect with people, is to kind of check them out from afar using social media or some other electronic means, and then make sure that they're credible and that they care about me, and then building that relationship like you're talking about that most people traditionally have with a banker. It's previously you might go play golf with your banker and to get to know him or her. But I think it's shifting more now to where everybody's, this millennial generation is very entrepreneurial focused. Many of them, the majority of them, want to open businesses throughout their life. And so they're doing their business. They really don't have time for that golf, the round of golf, or even going to maybe a traditional kind of networking event. And social media allows you to bridge and create connections without having to spend the time to be physically present somewhere.
Is it hard to keep up with the technology if a customer more and more expects to do their banking on their phone? How does a bank react to that necessity?
Right, so we are really dependent as banks on our technology providers and banking, and they can be somewhat limited because our executive management in community banks is aging, and technology hasn't been in the forefront of banking for a very long time. It's kind of a recent push to really get things on your device and have more of a mobile wallet. So we've implemented, taking an image of your check as soon as it was available. We're jumping on the Apple Pay bandwagon as soon as we can get those types of connections. But some of the other innovations that we've had to find have required us to go outside of our industry. So we've connected with Ordermatic, a local Oklahoma City company, and Concierge, another Oklahoma City company, to have interactive teller at our ATM locations because it wasn't offered in the banking industry, and we found the opportunity to work with the communications industry to provide that same level of service. So I think there's a push as you have some turnover in management of community banks, and as our customer base grows grows younger and more technologically savvy, that we're going to have to provide some leading edge products and financial services.
All right, our category today is Women in Banking. Jill Castilla is our guest with Citizens Bank of Edmond. We'll have more with Jill right after this.
When you have something important to communicate, it becomes clear that there's a lot of competition for your audience's attention. So how can your message stand out and actually resonate with your audience? Legal Graphics has the answers. The team at Legal Graphics will work with you to plan, design, and even test your presentation to ensure your message will be heard and remembered. Call Legal Graphics today to schedule an appointment. The readiness is all.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett without Kent Myers this week. Ken will be back with us on a future show. But our guest today is Jill Castilla. She's with Citizens Bank of Edmond, and our title of today's show is Women in Banking. And before we get into the specific gender differences that might imply to a career, I want to talk about one more trend in technology, which is where we left up, and that's Apple Pay. Apple on September 1st or so introduced this new app that was one step forward in using your phone to pay for goods and services. It seemed to have a higher level of security attached to it, and it just seemed like it was this month's thing that everybody had to go out and get. And I've got it on my phone. I haven't figured out a way to use it yet, but nonetheless, if I'm in the banking industry, I'm thinking, how do we continue to adapt to these things? So specifically with Apple, is it Apple Pay? Is that what it's called? Talk about that technology and why it's different or better or something we have to deal with.
Well, certainly I think that technology is shifting so that we want to be able to pay with our phone. I mean, everyone, I think it was some really high percentage, I can't remember the number, a typical person keeps their phone within 3 feet reach of them at all times. It's such an integral part of our lives now that it makes sense for that to become our wallet, that there's some way, rather than having a chip inserted into our body, to have a device, the phone, to be able to pay for our goods and services makes a lot of sense, and to be able to pay for non-merchant related services, pay for your babysitter and things like that, to be able to do that from the phone makes a lot of sense. I think there'll be quite a few different products rolling out over the next few months. There's quite a few merchants that are now developing their own pay apps that it just will, we don't know which one's going to stick. It depends on merchant adoption as to how quickly Apple Pay will take hold, if it becomes the dominant source, or if one of these other merchant developed apps or something coming from the financial industry will become the dominant force. But something's going to shake out. Back in the early 1900s, banks issued their own cash and currency until that was all nationalized to at a standard, and at some point we'll come to a standard when it comes to mobile payments, and where we can achieve the greatest level of efficiency, and the security piece is so it's so needed. There's so much fraud that's occurring with credit cards and accounts, and there's so many social engineering schemes that really take advantage of our customers, especially our seniors, that if there was a more secure product, it would be very beneficial to everyone.
Let's talk about the security issue for a moment, because hardly a week goes by when there's not some large security breach. Somebody's got 45 million social security numbers or credit card numbers. And as a consumer, or just as a person hearing this information, I don't know how concerned I should be, or what steps I should necessarily take. So what advice would you give me or someone else who asked you a question about security and the fact that so much of our information is out there in the electronic universe?
Yeah, and we're seeing the biggest schemes that are happening are the social engineering, where someone's calling pretending to be your grandson that's stuck in Mexico and asking for money to be sent to them. And also, they're very convincing with all the information on Facebook and Twitter and other social media outlets, and just in the newspaper even, that someone can pretend to be a relative of yours in a dire situation. So to make sure, typically those types of schemes will ask you not to call their father or whomever, so they're not made aware that Junior has gone to Mexico, and just make those calls. The actual physical security of your numbers and your account numbers, your credit card, keeping that in hand, trying not to hand over your credit card. Skimming is very prevalent. You can ask the waitress at a restaurant to either bring the device to you to scan your card, or going with her to scan your card. Trying to be as physically secure of your credit card information as possible is very beneficial. But when we get into the chip technology in a year or so, that should be somewhat alleviated. But there's still going to be lots of opportunities for fraud, just because there's so much information again out there that people can use to either pull more information from you through manipulation, or be able to use that specific information to cause a transaction to occur. Banks are the ones that are really taking the risk and the hit on all these fraud occurrences. We actually eat all of those costs, whether it's a large merchant that has a breach that was caused by them opening up something or not securing something for credit cards or debit cards information to be exposed. The banks actually take the loss of that. So I think we'll see some legislation going forward to where maybe that's more of a merchant cost, and if that occurs, then you have more of an incentive for some of these large retailers to be more secure with their information, because right now there's no cost to them if the breach occurs.
Let's switch now to the topic of really the title of our show, and that's the gender differences in banking. There's a much outdated image of a stodgy banker with a big cigar. I think the banker in the Monopoly game is a perfect image to have in your mind. But things have changed a lot. Women are running banks all over the country now. What advice do you give to young women who might be wanting to enter the banking industry?
Yeah, women dominate the numbers in banking. When we just look at number of employees and who's a woman and who's not, there is much greater percentage there are women that are not women. But at the senior ranks, you see much more limited female representation. There's just a handful of presidents, CEOs that are women in Oklahoma, and we're very progressive, I think, compared nationally. And what happens is that the traditional route for president and CEO is through the lending side of a bank. And whenever I look at chief lending officers throughout our state and throughout the nation, there's a very small number of women in that pipeline. Most of the women I know, including myself, my route to leading our bank was more on the operations side. And so I would encourage my fellow bankers to be open-minded and where the routes, to look at non-traditional routes of leadership into a bank. And I find great support to trying to encourage female leadership among my fellow bankers in Oklahoma as well as nationwide. But there's very limited supply on the lending side. So I encourage women to get over on the lending side, to not be afraid to get into those profit centers where you're going to get greater visibility, but then also encourage those in leadership positions to think about their successor maybe as being someone that may not traditionally come from lending.
What college majors are appropriate for someone that wants to enter the banking industry?
Really, it can be anything. I've seen art majors and I've seen history majors. Finance would be the most typical. I love the economics discipline. That was what my master's was in, and that's a great way to be able to understand interest rate risk. But typically, it's just a degree program that's going to allow you to develop your logic. Your analytical skills are exceptionally important. So you've got to be able to manipulate an Excel spreadsheet and be able to understand how ratios work and what you need to do to impact numerators and denominators to make the bank more profitable. When
women enter the banking field, do they have a better chance of advancement if they're at a large bank or at a smaller community bank?
I think that the opportunities at smaller banks are incredible. We're going to see some turnover in senior management. There is a succession crisis really throughout our community banking industry where that heir apparent really isn't apparent. So there's a great opportunity for women that are motivated, that are seeking great leadership opportunities in the community to look at community banking as a potential route. It's wonderful as a community banker to not only be able to finance the dreams for a small business and be part of those stories and help someone get into their first home, but you really get to be at the table in your community and really have an impact on where the community is going, influencing the strategic direction. It's an incredible career that I would highly encourage women to get engaged in.
So many industries are being consolidated as a larger entity consumes smaller entities and just becomes bigger, and the market forces change. What's the banking industry like in that area? What trends do you see?
I think we're going to see an increase in merger activity here in the next few years, and I think a lot of it is based upon the succession problem that I think is facing a lot of banks in my industry, as well as the regulatory burden. A lot of bankers are getting tired of this excessive regulatory burden. I think the election results will impact that some, where there's a little bit more optimism that we might receive some regulatory relief. It's really difficult for a very small community bank in a small town to keep up with these thousands of pages of regulatory requirements. And so those are really the two things I think are propelling some maybe short-term mergers in our industry, but I think that there'll be more banks started. We haven't had new banks since the financial crisis really emerged, but I think that will pick up again because it's such a wonderful industry. There's an opportunity to be very successful as a business, and then it's so needed. You don't want every small business loan in Edmond to have to go through a large bank in order to get approval, because you're never going to it's all going to be very cookie cutter and there won't be any nuances to it. You've got to have that community banker engaged in order for there to be some creativity in approaching some of those small business loans. And So I think that the need will result in there being more community banks going forward.
We have less than a minute left. Give me some specific examples of the regulation that's increased over the last few years and how it's affected your business model.
So the Dodd-Frank, that caused there to be excessive regulatory requirements. It created the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, which is an unregulated entity that has great intentions of protecting consumers, but has caused there to be excessive regulatory burden on banks. So if you go and get a mortgage, or if you have a child that maybe hasn't been in the workforce for very long and they're trying to get a mortgage, you'll see that there's a lot of roadblocks and it takes a lot longer. I think realtors are seeing a lot more closings that are being delayed, and a lot of that is due to the regulatory requirements, appraisals, and the ability to repay, and those types of regulations that have impacted the industry substantially, that haven't really caused a lot of great benefit, have slowed down that engine and has really hampered, I think, we haven't seen as much in Oklahoma because we've had such a drive to ownership, but I think it's even hampered our growth here.
All right. Our guest has been Jill Castilla. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure our guests have too. I'm sure our viewers have too. I'll be back with a final word to wrap up the show in just a moment. My appreciation to Jill for coming on today's show. We'll see you in a minute.
Thank you.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
You have children coming from a different lifestyle, different mindset. You have to open your arms and really do what you have to do to have that child become a part of your family. And if it's more patience, that's what you do. Kids gotta know they can trust you. And that's what we've tried to do with these kids.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. We're wrapping up a show where Jill Castilla was our guest. We discussed women in banking and the gender differences that might be involved with a career in the industry, and also all of the technology changes that are happening in the industry. Jill's information on the web can be found at citizensedmond.com, at citizensedmond.com. And of course, we have a website, theverdict.tv. Go there and tell us about a guest you'd like to see on an upcoming show. That's going to do it for today. I'll see you next time on The Verdict.